Now I would like to introduce our second speaker, Leslie Wickson. Actually, Dr. Leslie Wickson. She has a very impressive bio, and I want to make sure I get this right. So let me tell you that she is an internationally recognized research scientist, professor, author, and inspirational speaker. She was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. She graduated magna cum laude, let me say that again, magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Willamette University, followed by a master's degree in aero and astro engineering, and a doctorate in human factors and biomechanics from Stanford University. That's why I'm saying her bio is so impressive. She currently divides her professional time and attention between aerospace and academia, and lives in Southern California. She's going to be talking to us about glimpses of heaven on earth, her journey in science and faith. So Leslie, I'm looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thanks so much, Denise. It's great to be with you all this morning. What a fantastic talk that we just heard from Zach, and I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of them today as well. Many people might think that even to mention science and faith in the same conversation is oxymoronic, but I have to disagree. And this is the topic of my recent book, God of the Big Bang, How Modern Science Affirms the Creator. And it's also what I'll be talking about today. This topic is particularly important for students, young people, and church congregations because social researcher David Kinnaman recently reported in his book, You Lost Me, that one of the most significant reasons that young people are leaving the church today is because of the perception that the church is anti-science. My personal interest in science and faith started at an early age. My father would take us kids outside on clear starry nights to look at the stars and the moon and the planets through his backyard telescope. And gazing at the heavens, I started wondering about life's big questions, the same kinds of questions that humans have asked ever since we first inhabited this planet. Questions like, where did all this come from? How long has it been here? How big is it? Why are we here? How will it all end? And one of my personal favorites, is there anyone else out there? Starry nights do that to us. They make us think and feel and wonder about the big questions in life. And growing up in a Christian home and coming to faith at an early age, I always believed in my heart that God was the source of all this wonder. But I went to secular schools from grade school all the way through grad school and heard over and over again in my science classes that the facts of nature have absolutely nothing to do with God or religion. But if God was who he claimed to be as the very creator of the universe that I was studying, how could the truth about who God was logically contradict the truth about what God had created? How could the purely naturalistic theories of origins that were being taught in school mesh with my understanding of who God was? So my quest to reconcile science and faith began when I was quite young. In the middle of grad school, I started working at Lockheed on both the Hubble Space Telescope and the International Space Station programs. Before too long, I was designated as Lockheed's corporate astronaut. And I went through literally hundreds of hours of simulation and training exercises, including getting my pilot's license, getting my NAUI scuba certification, participating in neutral buoyancy simulations in gigantic water tanks, and flying aboard NASA's KC-135
I'm just
aircraft,
refilling my water. Thank you.
also known as the Vomit Comet. And since then, I've done work with some federal think tanks working on Air Force projects, along with some NASA projects, including NASA's Crew Exploration Vehicle, the Mars Exploration Rovers, and some lunar and Mars mission planning work. Just recently, while I was teaching astronomy at Azusa Pacific University, I was invited to write an op-ed article for CNN's Belief blog, which the CNN editor provocatively titled, Does Big Bang Breakthrough Offer Proof of God? In it, I mentioned that science is a tool that we can use to uncover the wonders of God's creation, and the public reaction was nothing short of astounding. The article went viral with over 500,000 views in less than a week, 70,000 plus shares on Facebook, and it was in the top 5 worldwide most shared news stories on social media. And on top of that, I received tons of email. Most of it was positive, but it was mixed in with just a little hate mail, enough to keep things interesting. And one person even got a hold of my personal cell phone number and called to give me a topic. This experience made me realize just how polarized people can be about the relationship between science and religion. In fact, this image portrays what many people picture when they think of science and religion: really loud and often obnoxious debates between Bill Nye the Science Guy and Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis. So a big part of my motivation in pursuing a more fruitful and peaceful dialogue between science and faith comes from my desire to help people wrestle through many of the issues and perceived conflicts that I wrestled with on my own in secular schools in the professional working world. But we have to ask ourselves, is this conflict real? Well, we have to admit that at the very least, there appears to be a conflict between scientism and creationism. But I would argue isms are conflating ideas that don't necessarily go together. In other words, science can be successfully practiced without a secular worldview, just as Christianity can be faithfully practiced without a sudden and recent interpretation of creation. After all, we do well to remember that with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. And I would like to suggest that there's some useful middle ground for meaningful dialogue about topics that bring together voices from both science and religion. If God is truly the creator, then he will reveal himself in what he's created, and science is a tool that we can use to uncover those wonders. And this isn't just my take on the issue. Contrary to what you may have heard or read, 40% of scientists polled in a Nature Journal study believe in a personal God as well as in life after death. And more recently, a study out of Rice University showed that 61% of American scientists self-identify as Christian. In fact, many famous scientists throughout history have believed in God as a creator. So next, I'd like to go over a few key pieces of evidence to help you understand why so many brilliant scientists would believe in God. So for starters, modern science arose in Christianized Western Europe. Science writer Michael Covington writes that Jews, Christians, and Muslims, essentially all monotheists, believe in a creator who made an orderly, rational, understandable universe and gave us permission to investigate and utilize it, thereby legitimizing science and technology and paving the way for modern science. On the other hand, atheists can't explain why it's even possible for us to understand the universe. And as Einstein famously stated, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. I just love that quote. And as Francis Bacon, Galileo, and many others have claimed through the years, God is the author of both scripture and creation. And essentially all of the great minds behind the modern scientific revolution were devout Christians. The next piece of evidence uniting science and faith is the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory has been called the most successful theory of the universe ever because all of our observational evidence so far is very consistent with it. The Big Bang model of the universe is based on evidence that the universe is expanding, and it's very God-friendly since it points to a beginning which necessitates a cause. Unlike the model that was popular before it, which was the steady state model. And the steady state model was made widely known by Carl Sagan's famous statement that the universe is all that is, all that ever was, and all that ever will be. The steady state model claims that the universe always existed, so there was no need to explain a beginning or a beginner. And contrary to popular opinion, the Big Bang was not a chaotic explosion, but rather a very highly ordered event requiring vast amounts of information. Physicist Stephen Hawking wrote, "If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed before it ever reached its present state." The odds of this happening just by random chance are worse than your odds of picking just the right piece of sand out of all the sand on all the beaches of the world, or of picking one specific star in a universe full of stars. Any faster than this critical rate, and matter would have dispersed too rapidly to allow stars and galaxies to form. And in an interview in the LA Times, science historian Frederick Burnham had this to say about God and the Big Bang. The idea that God created the universe is a more respectable hypothesis today than at any time in the last 100 years. Next, let's look at the teleological argument, which is perhaps the most commonly discussed argument for God's existence in today's science and technology-oriented society. This argument claims that the design and order that we observe in the natural realm point to a purposeful creator. The teleological argument goes hand in hand with the anthropic principle, which is also known as the Goldilocks principle, and the fine-tuning argument, all of which point out that just like all the just right things that Goldilocks found at the Three Bears house in the story, both the Earth and the universe have a long list of characteristics that are just right for life. For example, the Earth is not too big, not too small. Our gravity is not too strong, not too weak. Our atmosphere is not too thick, not too thin. And the list goes on and on. Everything is just right. So if any of these characteristics were off by even just a little, life would be impossible. And even though thousands of new extrasolar planets around other stars have been discovered, and perhaps many sun-like stars could support planetary systems, all of our space exploration so far has shown that our neighbors in space are not remotely capable of sustaining life of any complexity. If the Earth is just the result of some cosmic accident, surely we could find some attribute that could be improved upon. But when we look at all the special characteristics of the Earth that make it habitable, such as its distance from the sun, the right conditions for water to exist in all three physical phases, the exact thickness of its crust, its perfect day-night cycle, its axial tilt giving us seasons, its protective magnetic field, its perfectly proportioned moon, and its unique atmospheric characteristics, we quickly realize that we live in a pretty unique and improbable place. To change any of these essential attributes would decrease the likelihood of life existing or continuing to exist. And we see evidence of this life-friendly design, not just here on Earth and not just in the solar system, but throughout the entire universe. I don't have time to go into all the details, but we see fine-tuning in the values associated with each of these characteristics, including the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the expansion rate of the universe, the mass density of the universe, the universal gravitational constant, and many other attributes. There are to date over 300 of these finely tuned life-friendly characteristics that have been discovered throughout the universe, and the list is growing. The probability for occurrence of all these parameters to be exactly what they are is about 1 chance in 10 to the 280th power. That's like the odds of the same person buying just one lottery ticket each time he or she played and winning every single time, twice a week, every week, for 50 years in a row. Now, most statisticians would say that probabilities of anything less than 1 chance in 10 to the 50th power are not just improbable, but statistically impossible because too many things have to be just right at the same time. But in any case, to say this is extremely unlikely is an extreme understatement. Now, so overwhelming is the evidence of biofriendliness in our universe that currently the main counter-argument to the involvement of some type of creative intelligence behind it all is the multiverse hypothesis. Now, the multiverse hypothesis speculates that there may be an infinite number of separate universes, each with a different set of physical laws. And our universe is perhaps the only one among all of them to randomly get the set of laws just exactly right so that life can exist. Of course, so far there's no real way to either verify or falsify the existence of other parallel universes. So the multiverse hypothesis technically doesn't qualify as a scientific argument, but rather a philosophical one. And even if we concede the possible existence of additional universes, they still all rely on the existence of some set of orderly physical laws. And this quote is from one of my favorite scientists, Dr. Paul Davies at Arizona State University, who is a real guru in the world of theoretical physics. Basically, he's saying that the bio or life friendliness of our universe is extravagant, way more than what we need or might expect from just random chance. And he goes on to say that invoking an infinity of unseen universes just to explain certain features of the universe we do observe is an infinitely complex explanation. And this partial list summarizes the evidence we covered today, but it also includes some of the topics we didn't really have time to touch on, such as the very existence of orderly physical laws, the problem of abiogenesis, or the improbability of life arising from non-living matter, the fact that quantum mechanics allows room for the improbable, or what we might call miraculous. And string theory suggests that there may well be more dimensions of both space and time than what we normally observe, which to me hints at some of what we might call the supernatural. So the perceived conflict is simply not real. There will always be voices at the radical extremes of this dialogue. However, I believe that science and religion complement rather than contradict each other. If each are understood properly, they provide us with a wonderful meeting place for conversation and mind-altering dialogue. If God truly is the creator we believe him to be, then he will reveal himself through what he's created, and science can be an act of worship in searching out God's revelation of himself in nature. And finally, especially in these challenging times, we would all do well to heed theologian Rupertus Meldenius's advice: in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, and in all things charity. Thank you very much.
Yay, Leslie. Wow, what a provocative talk. I feel like there are probably so many questions that different people have. You covered a lot just in that very brief time, so we really appreciate you taking us through all of that. I think one of the questions that comes to mind, given our current situation with COVID, and there seems to be, I think, a movement towards, do you trust the scientists, or do you trust like a just general opinion? And people are either speak out very strongly for Dr. Fauci or against Dr. Fauci. I'm just wondering, I'd like to hear your perspective as a scientist. What is the right posture that we as Christians should have, towards the science and the authority of science in this moment with COVID and the development of the vaccine?
Right. So as I mentioned in my talk, I definitely look at science as a tool that we can use to wonders, and this particular project that we're in the midst of right now is no different. And I think that in particular, it's important for us to remember that actually we as Christians or people of faith have a lot in common with scientists in that, a lot of people don't have a real clear understanding of how science works. But I always tell my students that, look, science is about finding the best explanation given the current evidence that we have. And we go with that best explanation until new evidence shows up that would tell us something different. And in a similar way, in our faith life, the evidence that we have for Christianity being true gets us to a certain point where it removes obstacles. But ultimately, we have to make a decision based on faith to step out. And so I like to use that kind of analogy between where does the evidence take us? And I think it's a valuable lesson both from the standpoint of faith as well as our view of science. It's like, where's the evidence taking us? And I trust Dr. Fauci. I know his boss, Francis Collins, and he's a devout Christian. He's a top-notch scientist. He was the head of the Human Genome Project. And so yeah, I think we need to do our own homework to kind of figure out where the evidence leads us. But in general, scientists are trying to do that as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing that perspective. It's very helpful. And thank you again for your talk, Leslie. Terrific. Really appreciate it.